The words hit harder than I expected. Old witch. That's what my grandson called me, standing in my kitchen, eyes burning, voice sharp enough to cut the steam rising from the pot on the stove. It wasn't just the insult, it was who said it. Tyrese had never raised his voice at me before. He was always that polite, careful boy, the kind who said yes ma'am, even when he didn't mean it. But that day, something had changed in him. Something heavy, dark, like the city air after rain. He slammed the door when he left, and the sound echoed in my chest long after he was gone. I told myself to let it go. That's what 55 years of living in this world had taught me. Some words you swallow, not because they don't hurt, but because fighting back would break something that might never be fixed. But I didn't sleep that night. The clock ticked loud in the dark. I sat by the window, the moonlight slipping through the curtains, and wondered how a woman who had raised 3 children, buried 1 husband, and kept a family together through every storm could be reduced to old witch. Maybe he said it because I refused to give him money. Maybe because I told him the truth he didn't want to hear, that his new friends were using him. Or maybe, just maybe, because he saw in me the reflection of everything he didn't want to become. Poor, tired, still fighting to stay afloat in a country that had forgotten women like me. My name is Lorraine Carter, though most folks in Atlanta just call me Miss L. And this is not a story about revenge. It's a story about reckoning, about what happens when love gets buried under pride and family turns into strangers. 7 days after he called me that name, Tyrese came back. But this time, he wasn't angry. He was terrified. He came running through the rain, soaked, shaking, eyes wild like he'd seen a ghost. His sneakers left muddy prints all over my porch. I was about to scold him for tracking dirt inside when I saw his hands. They were trembling, clutching a torn envelope. "Nana," he said. His voice broke on that word. "Please, I need your help." And just like that, everything, the insult, the anger, the sleepless nights, vanished. Because when your blood calls for help, no matter how deep the wound, you answer. I opened the door. That's where it all began. The week that tore open every old scar I thought had healed and dragged me back into the kind of fight I thought I'd left behind decades ago. The kind of fight that makes or breaks who you really are. When he shoved the paper across the kitchen table, it looked like nothing more than a scrap, the corner of an envelope chewed by haste, ink feathered from the rain, but it had teeth. Tyrese's hands were still shaking. He folded them around his mug of coffee as if heat could weld courage into his palms. He kept his head down like someone who had learned how to make himself small to survive. "Open it," he said. He didn't meet my eyes. I smoothed the torn flap with one finger. The return address was stamped in a bureaucratic block, Georgia Division of Family and Children Services. Beneath that, a header in black, serious type. Notification of intent to file petition, temporary custody consideration. I read it twice before I could breathe. The words themselves were sterile, a kind of paper authority that tries to look like law. But the content wasn't dry. A complaint filed against Janelle Carter, Tyrese's mother, alleging neglect and substance-related impairment. The paper said an investigator intended to petition the court for temporary placement of Tyrese due to immediate safety concerns. The rest of the page was a blur. Dates, case numbers, the name of a social worker I recognized from meetings at the community center. My mouth tightened. My body remembered rowing through paperwork like this once, long ago, when I had had to stand in fluorescent-lit rooms and explain myself to people who measured lives and checkboxes. Tyrese finally looked up. His face was young in a way that angles toward a future, and terrified in a way that belongs to no age at all. "They came to our building," he said. "They asked about Mom. Miss Rivera, she said they were checking in. I thought it was routine. I didn't know they'd file. I didn't know they'd—" He swallowed. "They said if there's a petition, I might be put in temporary care. I could go into foster or a group home. Nana, I can't. I can't go to that place, please. The plea was raw, small. It hit me in the place under my ribs that had learned long ago how to make decisions fast. In my life, there have been summons, subpoenas, bills with red stamps, eviction notices, documents designed to unsettle you. They all had one thing in common. They wanted you to feel the instability as if it were your fault. I remember the first time the system had tried to take my dignity. I was 20 when my baby boy, my Marcus, was pulled out of a neighborhood street by men in blue who said he'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Institutions moved like glaciers around us, slow, heavy, indifferent. I spent months in courtrooms, in waiting rooms with vending machines that stole quarters and chairs that sagged with the weight of other people's despair. I learned then a truth that has stayed with me. When the state leans into your life, it does not do so gently. Did they talk to you? Did anyone threaten you? I asked, steady, because steadiness is a tool. He nodded. They asked questions, but there was a man in a suit. He took pictures. He said they'd be in contact. Then later, when I walked back, there were 2 men outside the building asking questions. They said if I said anything, his voice broke, they said they'd make it worse. Threats layered on top of an already precarious notice. This was not merely bureaucracy. This had teeth that could bite. The men who had shown up, casual, with the kind of coiled quiet you see in people who profit from fear, were the kind who worked the margins, informal evictions, redistribution of families' belongings, pushing people toward a system that helped by taking control. There are always ways for small aggressions to become laws. There was a radio in the corner playing a low gospel hum that the church down the street keeps alive all day. I could hear the choir, even through the double-pane window, voices that have sustained bodies and stitched hearts back together at every funeral and every wedding. Life in our neighborhood moves with a rhythm of reheated collard greens and morning prayer. We don't tend to surrender. We tend to organize. Where is Janelle now? I asked. She's with a woman at the clinic on Peachtree. Says she needs help. They gave us a number, but they left the petition card on our mailbox. He scrubbed his face with the heel of his hand. I tried to call her. But she turned her phone off. The image of Janelle shutting off the phone stuck in my stomach like a stone. Janelle, my middle child, had always been the brittle sunbeam in our family, quick as a smile that could melt a room. She had been carrying a load for years, part-time at the boutique downtown, nights cleaning houses, a boy who felt like both blessing and furnace. This is the arithmetic many Black women of my generation know by heart. We had patched ruptures before, with casseroles and calm words and late-night rides to clinics, but the department's notice meant someone else had decided they knew better. If Tyrese went into state care, the consequences would be deeper than a missed bed. Children zipped through those systems and came back frayed, or worse, lost. I had seen that in the faces at church potlucks. I had seen it in the hushed gossip of the block. This was about preservation, of family, of soul. I could feel the knot in my throat, the same knot I'd felt years ago when I had to stand up in a meeting and speak like the life of a child depended on it. It did then, it does now. We're not letting that happen, I said. It wasn't only a promise to a frightened teenager. It was a vow that carried the weight of a life spent patching what the world had a habit of tearing. We're going to see the social worker, we are going to the court if we have to, but first, we go to Janelle. He exhaled a half sob and a laugh at the same time, the sound of someone both relieved and bewildered by their own luck. We drove to the clinic in my old Chevy, the kind of car that held its own music and smelled faintly of lemon oil from my weekly cleaning. The trip took us through streets I've watched change, new coffee shops where corner stores used to be, luxury townhomes with 3-car garages that feel like art installations of wealth. Gentrification is a whisper that becomes a roar. At first it says, "We'll make this better," and then it says, "You are not part of our better." The clinic on Peachtree was a place I had sat waiting many times, for vaccines, for a friend, for a family member, an antiseptic sort of building with potted palms that looked like they'd been purchased at a discount store. Inside, a woman at the reception with tired eyes and a name tag said Janelle had been admitted. She'd been placed on an observation hold for her own safety. The nurse's face softened when I said my name, as if some network of mutual mothers exists under the city's skin. We were shown into a small room where Janelle sat, the light pale on her face. She looked smaller than I remembered. All the neat sharpness had smoothed into something softer, near broken. When she saw Tyrese, her whole posture shifted, like a shutter opening. "Baby," she murmured. He lost his grip and fell into her arms. For a moment, the room held a kind of fragile, private repair. "Why didn't you call me?" I asked her quietly when the nurses stepped out to give us privacy. "I tried," she said. I couldn't think straight. I thought I was doing okay. I wasn't. I'm sorry, Mama." The apology settled into the room like a small, dangerous thing. I thought about all the apologies I had carried, to Marcus for missing his school play when my shift at the hospital ran late, to friends for not being able to lend them money when they were behind. Apologies are currency, but they do not fix the mechanics of a system that measures you by boxes. We left the clinic with a plan. The social worker's name on the paper was real. I phoned him from the parking lot. He was reasonable on the phone, careful with his words the way people in his job must be. He explained the process. When a complaint is made and substantiated, the agency files an intent to petition, and the court may place a child temporarily while a full investigation occurs. It is supposed to be about safety. It is also a process that moves quickly and leaves families scrambling to show they can care for their own. "Are you able to care for him?" he asked. "I can," I said, and the word fell out of me with the solidity of a prescribed truth. I had a house, a small income from my pension and the leftover shifts at the clinic that I still pick up sometimes, a bed I could make. Most of all, I had the networks, women from church, neighbors who'd watched my babies when they were small, community leaders who would stand in a line for a cause. Systems notice that. They are sometimes tempered by it. "Then we will note your willingness to take temporary custody if that's the path the court chooses," he said. "But Mrs. Carter, there are forms you'll need to fill out. We'll do a home visit. It moves quick." Home visit. The words conjured images of strangers looking in cupboards, measuring whether a life meets their invisible standard. It is one thing to claim you're able, it is another to convince a stranger with forms and a clipboard that your home is worthy. "Do it," I said. "I'll fill out the forms. I'll meet whoever you need. But you got to know, I took care of children when it was just us and a radio. I raised my boys in houses that never had central heat. I can do this." He thanked me with an efficiency that felt like an official benediction. After we hung up, Tyrese put his head on my shoulder for a long time, like a child who has finally found shore. That night, I called the people I know. Pastor Joan picked up on the third ring and said, without waiting for an explanation, "Bring him by after 9. We'll put him on the prayer list." Rosa, who runs the center and knows everyone in 3 blocks, promised a meal and a letter of support. I called an old friend from my union days, Maybelle, who owed me a favor and who had, decades ago, thrown her body into picket lines for the sanctity of wages. She promised she'd come to court if it needed to happen. Networks are a kind of muscle memory. When you have patched holes in blankets and in neighborhoods for years, people remember. They show up. They are the kind of insurance the system sometimes respects. Formal letters, phone calls from pastors, witness statements from neighbors who can testify a child has stable adults around. I sat at my kitchen table until late, making lists. I wrote down, "I've never liked the smell of courtrooms. They always feel too cold, not because of the air conditioning, but because the air itself carries judgment." That morning, Tyrese and I woke up early. He barely touched his breakfast. He just stirred his cereal around with the spoon, eyes distant. "Nana," he whispered, "what if they take me away?" I straightened the stack of papers in front of me, copies of reports, letters from the church, character references from our neighbors. Order keeps you steady when the world wants to shake you apart. "Ain't nobody taking you away," I said. "We've got the truth, we've got witnesses, and most of all, we've got each other." But deep down, I knew truth didn't always win. Not here, not for families like ours. The system liked neat paperwork, not messy lives. When we walked into the courtroom, even the white walls seemed to watch us. Janelle, my daughter, Tyrese's mother, looked worn but proud. Her hair was pulled tight, her blouse neatly ironed, as if dignity could cover the bruises of poverty. Behind us sat Rosa and Pastor Joan from my church. They clasped their hands when they saw me, lips moving silently in prayer. The judge entered. Everyone stood. And in that moment, I whispered the one word that had carried me through every storm: steady. Because in this world, it's not always the smartest or strongest who survive. It's the ones who stay steady when others fall apart. But Clerk, a young woman with sharp glasses, began reading from a file. The State of Georgia versus Janelle Carter. Petition for temporary custody of minor, Tyrese Carter. Each word fell like a hammer on my heart. I squeezed Janelle's hand under the table. Her fingers were trembling. Then it was my turn. I rose from my seat, spine straight, voice calm but firm. Your Honor, my name is Lorraine Carter. Tyrese is my grandson. He has lived in my home, under my care, and he is safe. There are witnesses here today who can testify to that. I take full responsibility for his well-being. The judge studied me, an older Black woman in a worn church dress, her eyes full of both fatigue and fight. I could tell he wasn't used to women like me standing so tall in his courtroom. Mrs. Carter, he said, have you ever had custody of a child before? Yes, Your Honor, 3 of them. One is Janelle, the other 2 grown and doing fine. I've raised children all my life. This isn't new to me. It's what I was born to do. He paused. Something in his face softened. Then he said the one thing I'd been dreading. You're 68 years old, correct? Do you truly feel capable of handling the physical and emotional demands of raising a child again? My back stayed straight. My voice didn't waver. Your Honor, I walk 3 miles to church every Sunday. I cook, I clean, I take Tyrese to school myself. Age don't define strength, the heart does, and mine's still working just fine. A quiet amen echoed from the back of the courtroom, Pastor Joan again. After a short recess, Rosa rushed up to me in the hallway. He believes you, she whispered. The judge, I saw it in his eyes. You spoke like a mother, not a witness. I nodded, though my heart was still racing, because I knew, in court, nothing's won until the papers say so. Tyrese tugged my sleeve. Nana, what happens now? Now we wait, I said. But no matter what, you're coming home with me. You hear me? That's a promise. When the judge returned, the room fell silent. He unfolded the paper slowly, as if the future itself was trapped inside. The court grants temporary custody of Tyrese Carter to his grandmother, Mrs. Lorraine Carter. The arrangement will be reviewed in 90 days. Janelle gasped, hands over her mouth. I just closed my eyes and whispered a thank you to the God who never forgot the tired, the old, and the stubborn. As we stood to leave, the judge looked directly at me. Mrs. Carter, he said, the world could use more women like you. I smiled. The world has us, Your Honor. It just doesn't always listen. That night, back home, I watched Tyrese sleep. Janelle sat beside him, silent, tears tracing her cheeks. I opened my worn leather notebook and wrote by the yellow glow of the lamp. Every time the system tries to break us apart, we find new ways to hold tighter. But as I closed the book, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real storm hadn't even started yet. The house felt different that night. Quiet, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I'd always trusted silence. When you've lived long enough, you learn that silence can heal what words destroy. But that night, it felt like silence was holding its breath. Tyrese was asleep on the couch, still wearing his school hoodie. Janelle was in the kitchen, trying to scrub a pan that was already clean. She always did that when her nerves got bad, scrubbed like she could wash her mistakes away. I stepped out onto the porch. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of rain and old magnolia trees. The street was mostly empty, except for a gray sedan parked across from my house. Too clean, too still. At first, I didn't think much of it. Atlanta nights are full of strangers, cars, and lost souls. But when I came out again an hour later, the same car was still there, headlights off, engine humming low. I felt it then, that old instinct, the one that warns a mother before the phone rings, before the bad news comes. I narrowed my eyes, trying to see through the windshield. The driver's face was hidden behind the glare of a street lamp, but I saw the glow of a cigarette. 1, 2, 3 long drags. Whoever it was, he wasn't there by accident. I didn't tell Janelle, not yet. She'd been holding herself together by a thread since court, and I couldn't be the one to cut it. Instead, I locked every door, every window, double-checked the back latch, and left the hall light on. Old women like me, we don't scare easy, but we prepare. I went to bed but didn't sleep. Every sound, the creak of the porch, the tick of the clock, felt like a signal. At some point around 2 a.m., I heard it, a soft crunch of gravel outside. Then the low squeal of tires pulling away. I sat up, heart pounding, and looked out the window. The car was gone. The next morning, Janelle found me already dressed, a cup of coffee going cold in my hands. "You didn't sleep, did you?" she said. "Not much," I admitted. She sighed and sank into the chair across from me. "Mama, I can't stop thinking about that envelope Tyrese brought. Did you ever open it?" I froze. I'd almost forgotten. The torn envelope from that stormy night was still in the kitchen drawer. I walked over, pulled it out, and spread the papers across the table. They weren't bills. They weren't school forms either. They were bank statements, but not ours. Each page was labeled Carver Street Foundation. The totals made my head spin. Tens of thousands of dollars, all donated under fake names. And one signature kept repeating, Councilman Derek Boyd. My blood ran cold. That name, I'd heard it on the news last year. A politician under investigation for community redevelopment funds. The same man who had promised to clean up our neighborhood right before the city tore down 3 blocks of low-income housing. Janelle frowned. "Mama, what does this have to do with Tyrese?" I looked her dead in the eye. Everything. I spent the next few days quietly asking questions, at church, at the grocery store, at the laundromat where news traveled faster than Wi-Fi. People whispered about missing money, fake charities, and boys paid to deliver envelopes. It didn't take long before I realized Tyrese had been caught up in something dangerous, probably without even knowing it. That envelope he brought to me wasn't a cry for help. It was a warning someone never meant for him to open. 3 nights later, I saw the gray car again. Same street, same spot. Engine off, lights dark. This time, I didn't watch from behind the curtains. I went outside. I walked down my steps, my robe tied around me, the cool air cutting through the fabric. The driver's window rolled down just a little, enough for me to see a pair of eyes, dark and unreadable. "Can I help you?" I said. My voice didn't shake. "You've been sitting out here too many nights for it to be coincident." No answer. Just the ember of a cigarette glowing again. Then a voice, low, slow, southern. "You should tell your grandson to stop asking questions, Mrs. Carter." My stomach turned. "What questions?" I asked. The car door clicked shut, engine started, and before I could blink, it was gone, swallowed by the dark. I stood there, heart hammering, knowing one thing for sure. Whatever Tyrese had stumbled into, it wasn't just about money. It was power, and secrets people were willing to kill to protect. That night, I pulled my old notebook off the shelf again and wrote, "Sometimes the enemy doesn't come from outside. Sometimes he wears a neighbor's smile, drives a city car, and knows exactly where your porch light flickers." Then I looked out the window one last time before bed. The street was empty, but I could feel eyes still watching. The next morning, the world looked ordinary again, cruelly ordinary. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen table like nothing had happened, but the unease sat heavy in my bones, like a storm that hadn't passed yet. Tyrese was already awake, sitting on the porch steps with his headphones on, staring at the cracked pavement. He wasn't listening to music, I could tell. His thumb kept pausing on the same song, again and again. Something was eating that boy alive. I fixed him some eggs, walked outside, and sat beside him. The wood creaked under my weight. "You've been quiet lately," I said softly. "You in some kind of trouble, baby?" He didn't answer, just kept looking down at his sneakers, scuffed and gray. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, scared. "Grandma, if I tell you something, you can't tell Mom." "You got my word," I said. He hesitated, biting his lip. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a small black USB drive taped around the middle. "It's about that envelope I gave you," he said. "I wasn't supposed to have it. I didn't even know what was inside till that man started following me." My heart skipped. "What man?" "The one with the gray car." He told me everything. It started a month earlier when one of his friends, Marcus, got a job helping out at the Carver Street Foundation office downtown. At first, it was just filing papers and moving boxes. Then one night, Marcus handed Tyrese an envelope and told him to drop it off for an extra $50. Simple, easy, harmless, or so it seemed. But then, Marcus stopped coming to school. His phone was disconnected. And a week later, someone slipped that same envelope into Tyrese's locker, this time with his name on it. No note, no message, just those same financial documents. And tucked behind them, a flash drive. "I didn't know what was on it," he said. "I was scared, so I brought it to you. I thought you'd know what to do." I wanted to tell him he did the right thing, but my hands were shaking. "Baby," I whispered, "whoever's after this doesn't want it found." That night, I couldn't sleep again. I took the flash drive, plugged it into my old laptop, the one I used to keep recipes and grocery lists on, and waited. A folder popped open. Dozens of files, all named the same way. Project Cleanup, Confidential. I opened one, and that's when I saw it. A map of our neighborhood, colored in red lines. Every block labeled with numbers and names. Demolition schedule, it said. Underneath were signatures, including the councilman's, approving payments to fake contractors. Payments made from the foundation's Youth Development Fund. The same fund that had promised scholarships, computer labs, and safe parks for kids like Tyrese. They were stealing from us, stealing from our community, from our children. And my grandson had stumbled right into the middle of it. When I told Janelle, she nearly dropped her coffee. "Mama, we gotta call the police." I shook my head. "The police already work for these people. You saw what happened at court." She rubbed her face. "Then what are we supposed to do? Just sit here and wait for them to show up again?" "No," I said. "We're gonna make them regret underestimating this family." I'd spent too many years being called weak, a tired old woman with no power, but I'd survived worse than crooked politicians. I'd survived raising 2 kids on my own, losing a husband, and burying dreams I never got to chase. This was just another kind of storm. That afternoon, I went to see Pastor Jerome. If you want truth to spread in this neighborhood, you don't start with lawyers. You start with church. I handed him the printed files and watched his face pale. "Lord, have mercy," he whispered. "If this is true, half the council's in on it." "It's true," I said, "and we need to protect my grandson before they silence him like they did Marcus." He nodded slowly. "I'll make some calls, quiet ones." When I left the church, the sun was setting low behind the old oak trees. The light was gold, warm, but it felt like a warning. That night, Tyrese came into my room, eyes red. Grandma, I think they know, he said, voice trembling. Who knows? The people from the foundation. Someone called me from a blocked number. They said I had something that belonged to them. My heart clenched. What did you say? I hung up, but they said my name before I did. The phone rang again right then, shrill and sharp in the dark. I picked it up before the second ring. No voice, just breathing, slow, deliberate. Then a whisper. You should have burned it when you had the chance. Click. I didn't sleep that night either. I sat by the window, shotgun across my lap, a habit I thought I'd left in the past. The gray car didn't come, but I knew they were close. And for the first time in years, I wasn't just scared for my family. I was angry. Because when someone comes for your blood, your child, your grandchild, you don't pray for peace. You pray for justice. I used to think strength meant keeping quiet, holding everything inside, because the world didn't care about an old Black woman's pain. But that night, as I watched the shadows stretch across my living room walls, I understood something new. Silence was what they counted on, and I wasn't about to give them that. At sunrise, I made a decision. If they wanted to scare me, they'd have to come face to face with the woman they called a witch. I'd show them what real power looked like, the kind that came from surviving everything they thought would break you. I poured myself a cup of bitter coffee and started making calls. The first one was to Lena Brown, an old friend from church who worked at the local paper. She wasn't just a journalist, she was a storm in heels. Evelyn, you sound serious, she said, voice low and steady. What's going on? I've got something that'll burn half this city hall down, I told her, but I can't send it over email. They're watching. Then we meet in person, noon, the diner on 3rd and Willow. Bring everything. I hung up and turned to Tyrese, who sat at the table scrolling nervously through his phone. You're staying home today, I said. Lock the doors, don't answer calls unless it's me or your mama. Grandma, they already know where we live, he said quietly. Then let them come, I replied. They'll see what happens when you corner a Carter. At the diner, Lena was already waiting, a notepad tucked in her bag, lipstick perfect as always. She didn't waste time. Tell me everything. So I did, from the envelope to the USB drive to the call that ended with that whisper. When I slid the printed documents across the table, she froze. Project Cleanup, she murmured. I've seen whispers of this before. Real estate shell companies buying up foreclosed properties dirt cheap with public funds. Evelyn, this isn't just local. This could go federal. Then we need proof, I said. Real names, real transactions. She nodded, already scribbling notes. I'll start digging, but be careful. If they called your house, they're already nervous. I smiled grimly. Good. Nervous men make mistakes. That night, I found a letter slipped under my door. No return address, no words, just a photograph. It was of Tyrese walking home from the store. I felt my knees go weak. Janelle grabbed the photo from my hand and gasped. Mama, this is a threat. We have to go to the police. No, I said, taking the photo back. We go to the wrong one, and we'll end up on that wall, too. She looked at me, fear and faith warring in her eyes. Then what do we do? We fight smarter. The next day, I went to my job at the community center like nothing was wrong. I smiled at the kids, handed out sandwiches, asked about their grades, all while watching every car that slowed down outside. But inside, I was plotting. I knew these men, not personally, but I knew their kind. They thought they owned the world because they owned property. They thought they could bulldoze memories, raise prices, erase faces like mine from the neighborhood map. Not this time. I used the center's old printer to make copies of the files from the flash drive, 5 sets in total. One for Lena, one for the pastor, one for a lawyer I still trusted from my eviction case, and 2 I hid where no one would think to look. If they burned my house down tonight, the truth would still live. That evening, as Tyrese sat at the table doing homework, I heard tires crunch on gravel outside. A dark SUV, no plates. My stomach dropped. "Tyrese," I whispered, "go to your room, now." He didn't argue. The boy moved quick, quiet, like he'd done this before. I grabbed the shotgun from behind the pantry door and cracked the front window curtain. 2 men stepped out, black suits, dark glasses, too clean for this neighborhood. One of them knocked once, slow, deliberate. "Mrs. Carter," he called, "we just want to talk." "Then talk from out there," I said. He smiled faintly. "You have something that doesn't belong to you. If you're talking about my land, my house, or my grandson, everything here belongs to me." He sighed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. And you are making the mistake of thinking I'm scared." There was a silence. Then he said quietly, "We'll be in touch." They turned and left, just as calm as they came. But I knew that wasn't the end. That was a warning shot. Polite, professional, and deadly. That night, I couldn't help but think of my mother. She used to say, "Evil don't always come with a gun, baby. Sometimes it wears a suit and a smile." And I realized this fight wasn't just about money or property. It was about dignity, about who gets to stay and who gets erased. They wanted to call me the old witch. Fine, let them. Because witches in the old stories weren't evil. They were the women who knew too much, who refused to bow. And now they'd won up. The next morning, the story broke online. City council corruption scandal. Leaked files suggest fraud in housing project. Lena's article had gone live, and under it, my street address was trending. Hashtag Witch of Carver Street. I stared at the screen, half horrified, half proud. They wanted a witch. They just got one. But what I didn't know then, the real war hadn't even begun. When that article hit the news, I thought maybe, just maybe, we'd be free. That sunlight, once it hits rot, kills it. But the thing about sunlight is, it blinds too. By noon, my phone was ringing non-stop. Reporters, neighbors, even strangers. Some said I was brave. Others called me a liar. And a few called me worse. "You trying to destroy our city, Evelyn? You hate your own people. Stay out of things you don't understand." Even folks from church stopped by, not to help, but to warn me. "You done poked the wrong bear, Sister Carter," one of them whispered. "Those men don't play fair." I just smiled politely and said, "Then they should have picked another neighborhood." That afternoon, Tyrese came home pale as paper. "They jumped me, Grandma," he said quietly. "2 guys outside the rec center said to tell your witch grandma to mind her business." I froze. Then anger burned through me so fast I almost couldn't see straight. I cleaned his cut lip, my hands trembling. "You okay, baby?" "Yeah," he said, "but they took my phone." "That's all right," I said, voice shaking but firm. "They can't take your courage." He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time, I saw fear behind his eyes, and something else, shame. "Maybe they're right," he muttered. "Maybe this ain't our fight." That broke my heart clean in two. "Tyrese," I said, gripping his hands, "you are the fight. You and every kid they tried to silence. You think this is about me? No, baby. They're scared because they know you're the future they can't buy." He didn't answer, but I saw it in his eyes, the spark coming back. 2 days later, the church caught fire. It was just after midnight. Sirens screamed down Carver Street, red and blue lights washing over every window. By the time I got there, Pastor Jerome stood in the cold, tears streaking his face. Electrical, the fire chief said, old wiring. But I knew better. The files I gave him were gone. The office, the one where he'd hidden poppies, was nothing but ash. "They're sending messages," I whispered. And the message was clear. Stop or lose everything. The next morning, Lena called. "Evelyn, I think my phone's tapped," she said. "My editor told me to drop the story or lose my job. They're scared. I'm scared." "You can walk away," I said softly. "You've done enough." "No, I started this. If I stop now, they win." That's the thing about courage. It spreads, like fire, like faith. Later that week, I went to the market and noticed how quiet it was. People stared, whispered, some turned their backs. Then Miss Gloria, my neighbor of 20 years, stepped up beside me and said, "They say you've brought trouble, Evelyn." "Trouble was already here," I replied. "I just lit the light so folks could see it." She didn't argue. She just sighed, then slipped something into my bag before walking away. When I got home, I found a note inside, scrawled in her careful, shaking handwriting. "Be careful. The councilman's driver comes to your street at night. I seen him twice." So even in the fear, there was kindness, quiet resistance. That's how real revolutions start, not with shouting, but with whispers. That night, I couldn't sleep again. The city hummed like it was holding its breath. I sat on my porch with a blanket around my shoulders, watching shadows move across the street. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, coming closer. I gripped the shotgun. "If you're looking for trouble," I called out, "you just found it." The figure stopped under the street lamp. It was Marcus, the boy who'd vanished, Tyrese's friend. Only now, he looked thinner, older, eyes wild like he hadn't slept in days. "Mrs. Carter," he whispered. "I didn't know where else to go." I rushed forward and pulled him inside. "Child, everyone thought you were dead." He nodded shakingly. "They tried to make it that way." Marcus told us everything. How he'd taken those files, how he'd realized too late that the foundation wasn't saving kids, it was using them. How one night, after asking questions, he was chased off the road and left for dead near the river. "I hid for weeks," he said, "but when I saw the story online, I knew it was you. I had to warn you." "Warn me about what?" I asked. He looked at me, voice breaking. "They're planning something bigger, Mrs. Carter. The files you found, they were just the beginning. They're clearing whole neighborhoods. Tomorrow night, they meet at the city's planning office to sign the next phase." I felt my blood run cold. "How do you know?" "Because my uncle drives for them." That was the moment I knew what had to be done. I wasn't just fighting for my grandson anymore. I was fighting for every home, every church, every block that held memories of who we were. And if they thought I'd sit back quietly while they erased us, they didn't know who they were dealing with. I turned to Tyrese and Marcus. "Boys, get some rest. Tomorrow, we take this fight to their doorstep." Because sometimes the only way to face the devil is to knock on his door yourself. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flames, the church burning, the fear in Tyrese's eyes, the ghost of Marcus sitting at my kitchen table. But there was no time for sleep. War doesn't wait for the weary. By dawn, I was already dressed. Black coat, flat shoes, and that old silver cross my mama gave me the day I left home. She used to say, "When you wear this, the devil sees his reflection." Well, tonight, the devil was going to see it clear. At breakfast, Marcus sat with his head down. His hands were trembling around a cup of instant coffee. Tyrese, on the other hand, looked older, harder, like the boy had turned into a man overnight. "Grandma," he said quietly, "what's the plan?" I took a deep breath. We don't fight them with guns, baby. We fight them with truth, with proof. Marcus nodded. I can get us inside the building. My uncle still works there. He leaves the back door open for the cleaning crew at 9. The files are in the conference room on the second floor. And the meeting, I asked, starts at 10. Councilman Reeves, 2 developers, and a rep from the foundation. I looked at the boys, young, scared, but ready. Then tonight, we go in. We get what we need, and we make sure the world hears it. Evening came slow. The city was quiet, too quiet, like it knew something was about to happen. We parked 3 blocks from the planning office, behind an old laundromat that hadn't seen customers in years. The air was thick, heavy with summer heat. Cicadas hummed like warning bells. You sure about this? Marcus whispered. No, I said, but I'm sure about why. We slipped through the back alley, shoes crunching on broken glass. When we reached the building, the side door was already cracked open, just like Marcus promised. Inside, it smelled like paper, bleach, and secrets. The conference room was dark, except for the glow of a computer screen left on sleep mode. Files were stacked on the table, contracts, blueprints, signatures. I started snapping photos with my phone, while Marcus copied digital files to a flash drive. Tyrese stood watch by the window, every muscle tense. Suddenly he hissed, "Grandma, someone's coming." Footsteps echoed down the hall, heavy, measured, getting closer. We ducked behind a filing cabinet just as the door creaked open. A man stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a gray suit. He turned on the light and sighed. Can't believe we're signing this mess off tomorrow, he muttered to himself. Half these families still think they'll get rehoused. My heart pounded. I recognized that voice. Councilman Reeves. He poured himself a drink, checked his phone, and sat down, right next to the folder labeled Phase 2 Carver Expansion. We need that folder, I whispered to Marcus. He nodded, took a deep breath, and crawled forward like a shadow. For a moment, everything was still. Then Reeves's phone rang, and he turned away, just long enough for Marcus to snatch the folder and slide back. We almost made it out. Almost. Hey! Reeves spun around. Our eyes met. What the? Who's there? Tyrese grabbed my arm. Run! We bolted down the hallway as Reeves shouted behind us, footsteps pounding close. Marcus shoved open the stairwell door and yelled, "This way!" We flew down the stairs, hearts in our throats, papers scattering behind us. Outside, the night air hit like cold water. A black SUV screeched around the corner, headlights blinding us. "Go!" I screamed. "Run, boys!" Tyrese and Marcus darted left, disappearing between the buildings. I turned right, clutching the folder tight against my chest, and ran. The SUV's doors flew open. 2 men jumped out. One shouted, "Stop her!" But I didn't stop. Not for them, not for fear, not anymore. I dove behind a dumpster, breath ragged, heart hammering. My knees ached, my lungs burned, but I held on to that folder like it was scripture. I waited until the street went quiet. When I peeked out, the SUV was gone. I called Tyrese, no answer. Marcus, voicemail. For a moment, panic nearly broke me. But then I saw the silver cross around my neck glinting in the streetlight, and I remembered Mama's words. The devil runs from women who refuse to kneel. So I stood up, and I walked, slow, steady, all the way to Lena's apartment. When she opened the door and saw me, dirt-streaked and trembling, she didn't ask questions. I just handed her the folder. "Get this out," I said, "before they find me." She took it with both hands, eyes wide. "Evelyn, where are Tyrese and Marcus?" I shook my head. "I don't know, but I'll find them. Because there's no storm stronger than a grandmother who's lost her fear." That night, I sat alone on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, waiting for a call that didn't come. And then, just past midnight, it rang. "Grandma?" It was Tyrese, whispering. "Baby, are you all right?" I gasped. "We're okay. We're hiding at Marcus's aunt's place, but they're looking for us. Stay put. Don't move till I say so." "Grandma," he said, voice shaking, "I saw something in that building, something worse than files. They had pictures of people, us, Pastor Jerome, you, like they've been watching." Silence. I swallowed hard. I took a deep breath. Then it means we hit the right nerve. Because when power feels you coming, it doesn't hide, it hunts. And now I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. And they were losing it. Somewhere in the city, the councilman was calling his partners, the foundation was panicking, and men in suits were preparing to clean their mess. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel old. I felt alive, and angry and ready. Tomorrow, I told myself, everything changes. Tomorrow, the witch fights back. The night my daughter almost died was the night everything changed. Rain slammed against the windows, thunder cracking so loud it made the house tremble. I was sitting by the window, my knitting untouched, my heart uneasy. I hadn't heard from Naomi in days, and that silence, it wasn't like her, not after what we'd been through. Then my phone rang. It was a hospital in Atlanta. "Ma'am, your daughter has been admitted. You're listed as her emergency contact." My body went cold. They wouldn't tell me more over the phone. I grabbed my coat and keys, and within minutes I was on the road, driving through the storm with trembling hands. Every mile felt like a lifetime. When I arrived, Naomi was in the ICU. Tubes, monitors, machines. She looked so small, so fragile. The doctor told me she'd overdosed on pills. It was an accident, he said, but I knew better. It was the weight of the world, the guilt, the exhaustion of fighting alone. I sat beside her bed and prayed harder than I had in years. I told God I would trade every blessing I had left if he'd just give me one more chance to make things right with my child. And then, faintly, Naomi's hand twitched. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy and lost, but alive. "Mama," she whispered, "I didn't mean to." I held her hand tight. "You're here, baby. That's all that matters." When she was discharged a week later, I brought her home. The first few days were quiet, heavy with unspoken words. Then one morning, I found her sitting on the porch, watching the sunrise. She said softly, "Mama, I'm tired of running. I want to get clean, for real this time." And she did. She started therapy, joined a recovery group, and even began volunteering at the church's community kitchen. It wasn't easy. There were relapses, tears, nights of doubt, but she fought her way back to herself. And little by little, she began to rebuild what life had taken from her. It's been 5 years since that stormy night. Naomi is sober now, working as a counselor for women in recovery. And my grandson, Elijah, he's 22, studying social work, carrying the same fire his mama once had. Last week, he came home for dinner. He's taller than me now, with that same stubborn jawline that used to make me want to snatch him up when he talked back. We ate, laughed, shared stories, and when the plates were cleared, he got quiet. "Grandma," he said, "you remember when I called you the old witch?" I smiled. "I remember, child. I've been called worse." He shook his head. "I was wrong. I didn't understand what you carried. You kept this family alive when we were all breaking apart. I'm sorry." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Tears burned my eyes, but I let them fall. Not out of sadness, out of release. I reached for his hand and said, "Baby, strength doesn't mean never falling. It means getting up every damn time the world tries to bury you." He nodded. "That's what I want to do too, help people stand back up." I looked at him, at my daughter in the doorway, and realized, after everything, we'd found our way home. I still keep that first letter Naomi wrote to me years ago, the one where she said, "I don't know if I'll ever deserve your love again." Sometimes, late at night, I unfold it and whisper back, "You always did. You just had to believe it yourself." Because love, real love, isn't about being perfect. It's about staying when everyone else walks away. It's about fighting for the people you refuse to lose. And it's about knowing that even after the storm, even after the hurt, there's still light. And I've lived long enough to see it shine again.